There are no rules in screenwriting, and with that, there's only one rule: don't bore me. I mean, that's the only rule in screenwriting. So don't take structure as a rule. Take structure as a successful opportunity in which to convey your story. Succinct, specific, we get in, we get out. We don't waste a lot of time on descriptions, on wordiness, because we need action. Unless you're telling like a French art house film, you don't have a lot of time to waste. So your story has to move. You've got your hook, you've got your protagonist introduction and flaw. So we see this character in action, we meet them in their flaw. You've got your catalyst or inciting incident. You've got your first and second obstacles that escalate to the climax, which is your act 3, and then the resolution. And your final image, which can also be part of your resolution. Those things can layer together. Okay, so this is the guide. It doesn't mean if I don't hit this exact thing, I'm doomed. No, this is the guide. So our protagonist, everybody know what a protagonist is? That's the lead in our story, right? That's the person who we follow through the story. And a protagonist does not need to be perfect. In fact, they're so much more interesting when they're flawed and they're imperfect and they have a lesson to learn. That allows our protagonist to make an arc. That's a much more interesting story and journey to watch somebody go through than if they're perfect from the beginning and they end the same way. There's no story there. There's no character arc. So when we're looking at building our story, you want to build your story around who that protagonist is and what that lesson is that they're going to learn. What is their flaw? Flaw and catalyst or inciting incident, I'll use them interchangeably, are directly connected. That inciting incident is going to set in motion the rest of the story. That inciting incident is what propels the protagonist into action. And that action of the story will challenge their flaw all the way through. Will they be able to overcome their flaw? Will they be able to learn to deal with their flaw? Will they be a different person by the end? All of our actions are set up in order to challenge that flaw. And for fun. It's always, they push back. A lot of people call it the reluctant hero. It's because if they just took that step and they said, yes, I'm gonna go do this, the story would be over much sooner. And plus, your hero doesn't just want to go do things. We have to push them to do things. All right? It's boring if they're eager to go, yes, I want to change. I don't want to change. I don't even want to change my room around. I'm stuck in my ways, and most people are. And most of the time, we can't even see our own flaws to get out of our own way. And our heroes can't at all either. So if they're too eager to do things, that doesn't ring true. So when you're thinking about your story, you need to think about what I want this character to deal with. What is the flaw? What is the lesson? I've got a student who's working on a short, and the protagonist is a very negative, unhappy FBI agent. And this FBI agent, nobody likes to work with him. He's just the worst. And we set that up very early on. And he's tasked now with guarding the Buddha. So what better way to challenge somebody's negativity than to put them with one of the most positive people in the world, right? The inciting incident is that the Buddha goes missing. The Buddha is kidnapped. Okay, so that sets the story in motion, and he's got to figure out how to solve the mystery of what happened to the Buddha. But nobody wants to work with him because he's so negative. So that makes it very hard for him to do his job when nobody wants to work with him and nobody will work with him. So we want to create characters who have made their own life challenging, like Finding Nemo. It's a great little story. Who's our protagonist? Marlin, Dad, right? Yeah, Nemo gets kidnapped, but the journey is Marlin's, right? Marlin, we follow Marlin through the story as he tries to find and rescue his son. What are Marlin's flaws? He is very overprotective because what's the backstory? He lost his family, right? His whole family was taken away. He's scared to death. Nemo's the only thing he has left in this world. So he's very overprotective. He's also very afraid, right? He fears the big wide ocean and everything out there. So Safe to say that Marlon's got a journey ahead of him because his son's kidnapped. What's it gonna take to find his son? Crossing the ocean, encountering every fear that he has, right? Yeah, so that's such a great, simple story. It's just a guy whose son's been kidnapped. It's so simple, right? And who ends up being his sidekick? Dory. And what's her problem? She's got a real big flaw, right? She can't remember anything. Yeah, she's got a problem. Does that make it easier or harder for our hero? Harder. Much harder, right? So you don't want to, that's what the middle of the story is about, making it harder on your hero. We're looking at Finding Nemo, and we know that Marlin has this great backstory of losing his whole family, and he's overprotective, and he's afraid of everything in the ocean because he doesn't want to lose his son. What's the inciting incident? What's the catalyst? What sends Marlin into action? Yeah, what happens? Nemo is kidnapped, right? Great. That sets the story in motion. We need a moment that sets that story in motion and allows your hero, and I use hero and protagonist interchangeably. Hero kind of implies that you've got this perfect person. It's not unless you're in a Marvel film. You've got that inciting incident or that catalyst. Yeah? Everybody good? Okay. So then what happens throughout the bulk of the story, you take your hero and you bang them against a brick wall over and over again, right? You put a flaw, or you put an obstacle and an obstacle and an obstacle in their way. You never make it easy. We've met our protagonist, we've met our hero at the beginning of the story on page 1 in their regular life. And then when we've seen their flaw in action, and then an inciting incident happened, something that sent them spiraling out of control, and now they've had to make a choice, and this choice is leading them through Act 2, where they're going to run into obstacles. Your hero, your hero will make this choice, usually because they have to. They're forced to make the choice. Marlin is forced to go look for his son, because that's who he is. He can't call like the fish police. That wasn't part of the story. We're forced to take action if we want to solve this problem. That's what our heroes need to do. So these obstacles, though, as you're thinking about your story, these obstacles need to escalate. Escalation is really important. That climax is what happens in Act 3. And the resolution, and then a scene that shows us the lesson learned. Somehow our protagonist is now going to look at life slightly differently. They're going to see things in a little bit different way because they've recognized this flaw that they're dealing with. So in Finding Nemo, at the end, how is Marlin different? He's not as afraid anymore. And how can we tell that? Right? And he says something about don't go too close to the edge of the world, or it's something like that, right? Where at the beginning, oh no, you can't go over there. So this character has had a very big arc, a very big difference in his life from this experience. That's what we want to see in your character, something like that. It doesn't have to be that extreme, but we want to see that difference. So at the beginning, and when I say in action, that's because you guys need to show me, not tell me. You need to show your reader, not tell them. This is telling. Marlin doesn't let Nemo go anywhere. That's me telling you about Marlin. Me showing you is Nemo swims to the edge of the bank and begins to plummet into the darkness. And Marlin, then we see Marlin screams, "No, Nemo, get away from there!" and swims by and grabs his little fin and pulls him back into the light. So there's a big difference in how I tell you and I show you. Our job is to show, okay? And that's partly why we outline, because we need to start showing it. We need to tell it to ourselves so that we understand where we're going with it. And then in the writing, it's a good story. Well, we're trying to figure out our good story. We're writing it out, we're thinking about it, we're telling it to ourselves, this is what happens, this is what happens. And then the well-told part then we learn to tell it, to show it on the page instead of telling it. Your story is about action. You have to show us the action through character moments, through the choices your characters make. Our job as the writer is to come up with the really good, fun stuff, the challenging obstacles. I heard that the Coen brothers will work on multiple projects at the same time. And they don't do a lot of outlining. And that's fine. They've been doing this for a very, very long time. I suggest you stick with outlining initially until you get this muscle memory of what to expect. But they will put their characters, they will brainstorm and put their characters into a situation that's so hard, they don't know how they're going to get their characters out. And then they have to walk away and work on something else and let their subconscious and their creativity figure out how they're going to get their characters out of those situations. Those are great. That's great. That's so much fun to watch. And they'll do really creative and unexpected things. And that's what we want to do. That it takes them days to figure out how to get their characters out of. So I offer you this challenge not to give your character the first thing you come up with. You see, that's the easy way out. And that's what we do because we're so used to watching shows and to seeing things. And we draw, all that stuff gets stuck in our brains, right? Whether you realize it or not. And you sit down to start writing, and all of a sudden 20 years of seeing similar stuff comes creeping in. And you're like, yeah, we can do this, and we can do this, and then we can do this. And it's similar because you haven't sat down and really thought about how to creatively solve a problem or create a problem that is so hard to solve it takes you 3 days to figure it out. So I had somebody in this class a few years ago ask me, oh, well, how do we do that? I said, well, that's your job. You sit down and you start brainstorming. And so here's the clue, here's the key. How do I solve this problem? You sit down and you brainstorm 20 different possible ways that you could solve that problem. And you're going, I can only come up with 10. And I said, well, then go take a walk. Go do something else. And you need to start thinking outside the box because you can come up with another 10. And when you do, that's when you've really started tapping into your creative solutions, your creative problem solving. And that's what will make your stories more interesting. Okay, so in your stories, in your shorts, well, even a short has 3 acts. It's just much smaller. So if you think about those 8 pages and 1 page is